let's understand, this is the first time you've told this story or any story about what happened in the bedroom on February 24th, 2023, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you did not tell the police on that day in the bedroom. You did not tell the police on that day in the hospital. You did not tell them when you were back at the station, correct?
Judge, I'd object. May we approach?
You can approach.
He walked into that courtroom looking exactly like what he had spent years telling the world he was: a federal law enforcement officer, a husband, a father, a man with nothing to hide. But by the time a Virginia judge was done speaking on June 5th, 2026, that image was gone for good. The level of cruelty, calculation, and inhumanity in this case reflects something far deeper than anger or impulse. 2 people were dead. 1 little girl had lost everything. And a man who once carried a federal badge was now headed to prison for the rest of his life. This is how it happened. If you drove through Herndon, Virginia in 2021 and somehow landed on the Banfield street, you would have seen exactly what you'd expect. A nice house in a quiet suburb just outside Washington, D.C. 2 working professionals. A young daughter. The kind of life that looks from the outside like it's all figured out. Brendan Banfield was 40 years old and worked as a special agent for the Internal Revenue Service, a criminal investigator, not a desk job. He carried a weapon, he had law enforcement training, and he understood better than most people how investigations work. His wife, Christine, was 37, a pediatric intensive care nurse at Inova Fairfax, the kind of person whose job requires staying calm in rooms where children are fighting for their lives. By every account from her colleagues and her family, she was exactly that kind of person at home too. Steady, warm, reliable. They had met in college, built their life together first in New York, then relocated to Virginia when Brendan's federal career took them south. They had a daughter, Valerie, who was 3.5 years old in October 2021 when they hired a live-in au pair to help with childcare. Her name was Juliana Perez Magalhães. She was 21 years old and had come from Brazil as part of a formal au pair exchange program. By Juliana's own account at trial, those first months were professional. She barely spoke to Brendan. Her relationship was primarily with Christine and Valerie. That changed in August of 2022, roughly 10 months after she arrived, when the relationship between Brendan and Juliana became physical. Now, affairs happen. That's an unfortunate reality. But what separates this story from that is what Brendan Banfield says he told Juliana next, just 2 months into the relationship, in October 2022, on a trip to New York that included his own daughter. He told her he had a plan. Not a plan to leave his wife. Not a plan to end the marriage through a lawyer and a courthouse. When Juliana testified at trial, she said his words were clear. Divorce was not an option. He cited money. He cited custody of Valerie. He didn't want to share her, and he knew Christine would fight for her. So he told Juliana he was going to get rid of Christine instead. Juliana said at first she thought he was joking. He was not. Before we go any further, if you're watching this and want to stay on top of cases like this one, cases where the verified facts are stranger than anything anyone could make up, subscribing means you won't miss what comes next. We cover this stuff accurately, completely, and without an agenda.
So what did the plan actually look like? Because here is where Brendan Banfield's law enforcement background becomes one of the most unsettling parts of this entire story. He didn't just decide to do something terrible. He approached it the way a trained investigator thinks, working backwards from what the scene would need to look like and building toward it. The core idea was this. If Christine was going to die, someone else had to look responsible. A stranger.
an intruder, someone with a documented reason to be aggressive, someone who could plausibly be painted as the threat Brendan walked in on. And so, starting in January 2023, Brendan and Juliana created a fake profile on FetLife, a niche social platform for the lifestyle community, using Christine's name, a photo taken from Christine's Facebook, and an email address created specifically for this purpose. The profile was called Anastasia Knight. The messages it sent were designed to find a man who would come to the house armed with a knife and willing to be physically aggressive. They went through dozens of conversations. Juliana testified that they always refused to meet anywhere public. Every user who suggested a coffee shop, a bar, anywhere outside the home was eliminated. The person they needed had to be willing to walk into a private residence armed with no prior in-person meeting. Most people declined. One did not. Joseph Ryan was 39 years old and lived locally. He had no connection to the Banfields. He genuinely believed he was communicating with a woman named Christine, who had arranged a consensual encounter. He had no idea he was being selected as a murder prop.
In the weeks leading up to February 24th, 2023, Brendan ran what prosecutors described as a quiet operational checklist. He and Juliana visited a gun range twice, October and December 2022, where he taught her to shoot a handgun. Juliana signed the range waiver on October 29, 2022, a fact confirmed by exhibit at trial. Both got new phones and new Apple IDs in the days before the murders. New windows were installed at the house. Brendan told Juliana they were more soundproof. He then had her go into the master bedroom and scream while he stood outside to test whether neighbors could hear anything. He scouted the neighborhood for ring cameras and doorbell cameras. He changed his morning routine in the weeks before, leaving early, stopping for breakfast somewhere visible, so that on the morning of February 24th, his presence at a nearby McDonald's wouldn't stand out as unusual. On the night of February 23rd, Juliana parked her car in the cul-de-sac rather than the driveway, so Ryan wouldn't be startled by an unfamiliar vehicle when he arrived. Brendan used Christine's own phone, through a smart lock app, to unlock the front door and set it to stay open. He then powered the phone off and hid it in a drawer in the kitchen bar area. Christine had been talked out of her scheduled shift that day. She was asleep in the master bedroom when her husband left for McDonald's, when Juliana buckled their 4-year-old into a car seat in the cul-de-sac, and when Joseph Ryan pulled into the driveway just minutes later. Juliana called Christine's phone. It went to voicemail, as planned. She immediately called Brendan and told him exactly what he had scripted. A strange man had come to the house, and she was frightened. Brendan told her to stay put. He was on his way. When Brendan arrived, he and Juliana entered through the basement door at the back of the house, the same basement where their 4-year-old daughter was now waiting alone. They left Valerie there. They went upstairs together. According to Juliana's trial testimony, Brendan paused at the bottom of the staircase leading to the master bedroom and listened. Then he drew his gun. She followed.
Brendan opened the bedroom door. Juliana testified that she saw Joseph Ryan on the bed with Christine. Brendan announced himself as a police officer and fired. Christine, hearing Brendan's voice, cried out to him, "Brendan, he has a knife!" Ryan was struck. He was still moving. Juliana, standing near the dresser, fired a second shot that killed him. What happened to Christine in the moments that followed is what the prosecution spent weeks proving, and what Brendan spent weeks denying from the witness stand. Juliana testified that after Ryan fell, Brendan moved to Christine, got on top of her, and stabbed her repeatedly in the neck with the knife Ryan had brought. She said she crouched by the far side of the bed, covered her ears, and looked away. At some point, she was sent to open the gun safe, to make the scene look like Brendan had grabbed a weapon spontaneously. He also, according to Juliana's testimony, gathered some of Christine's blood in his hand and transferred it onto Ryan's body.
Brendan took the stand and told a different story entirely. He said he came home, found Ryan attacking Christine, shot him in self-defense, and never touched the knife. He acknowledged the affair with Juliana, but called the prosecution's theory absurd. At this point, our relationship is maybe 6 to 8 weeks old, he told the jury, referring to a period prosecutors placed the first conversation about a plan. I think it's an absurd line of questioning. The jury had to decide who to believe, a trained federal agent insisting on his innocence, or a 25-year-old woman who had already pleaded guilty and was testifying under a cooperation agreement. They deliberated for nearly 9 hours across 2 days. On February 2nd, 2026, they returned a verdict on every single count. Guilty.
One detail that never made it to the trial, but shaped the entire investigation. In the days after the murders, while Brendan was still free, the Banfield's daughter, not yet 5 years old, was heard calling Juliana Mommy. That detail reached investigators. It focused their attention. And it is, in part, what ultimately unravelled the story Brendan had constructed. On June 5th, 2026, before Judge Penny Azkarate handed down her sentence, the people Brendan Banfield had destroyed stood up and spoke. Christine's sister, Danielle Hawker, described a grief that has no clean edges, not the kind that ends when a verdict comes in. She told the court that when she looks in a mirror sometimes, she sees Christine's face first, and then it's gone. She talked about a life where the daily messages, the phone calls on the drive home, the trip she had already booked to celebrate Valerie's 5th birthday, all of it stopped on February 24th, 2023, and none of it is coming back. Joseph Ryan's mother, Deirdre Fisher, appeared virtually. She told the court she was the last person Ryan called the night before he was killed. She said she still hears his voice telling her to take better care of herself. She said her son was chosen because Brendan Banfield thought he would make a good fall guy. She called that the final insult on top of everything else. Brendan himself spoke last. He spent roughly 10 minutes arguing evidence. He said he was greatly disappointed in the legal system. He expressed no remorse for Christine or for Joseph Ryan.
I'm greatly disappointed in the legal system. The system has failed not only me, but also Christine, my daughter Valerie, the Bensons, and the rest of my family. I was found guilty of a crime that I did not commit, but it's actually impossible to have committed the crime, as the prosecution, their experts, and their witnesses have presented.
Judge Azkarate sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 3 years for the firearms conviction, and 5 years for child endangerment, all consecutive. She noted that 5 years earlier, the same crimes would have carried the death penalty. Virginia abolished capital punishment in 2021. This was the maximum the law allowed.
Juliana Perez Magahaish received 10 years, with credit for time served. Her attorney noted she would likely serve roughly 4 years and 2 months. Valerie is now 7 years old. She has been living with Brendan's mother since the murders. She will grow up knowing her father is in prison for killing her mother. And as Christine's sister put it in court, they will do everything they can to make sure Valerie comes to know her mother through joy and love, not only through the weight of what was taken from her. This case is closed in the legal sense. The verdict is in, the sentence is handed down, the appeals process is now beginning. But for Christine Banfield's family, for Joseph Ryan's family, and for a little girl named Valerie, none of this is over. If you want to stay with stories like this one, cases where we take the time to get every detail right, go through the actual trial records, and give you the full picture, subscribing keeps you here when the next chapter comes. Because on cases this significant, we always come back. Thank you for watching.